Miriam,
Hello.
hi. How you doing? Just a second, let me figure this out here.
Okay, thank you.
There we are.
Thank you for your time. Can I record the session?
Of course, go right ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time in the holiday. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. And sorry to make it on a holiday, but I just figured, you know what? This was the easiest way to do it other than try to fit it into my schedule this week.
Yes, I know, I understand, and thank you so much. Uh,
And just a question for you, Miriam. Is this going to go beyond your classroom? Are you planning on publishing it anywhere, or is it just a classroom project?
is it part of my project about the relationship between indigenous people and international people, and it is part of my assignments.
Okay, but are you planning on publishing it beyond school?
No, no, I'm
Okay,
not.
good enough.
Okay. Uh, First, as I told you, I'm an Iranian student who moved to Canada recently. And when I moved here, I didn't have enough information about Aboriginal people in Canada. I didn't know them. So my question is, you as a journalist and a media professor, how do you introduce Aboriginal people to international people and newcomers in Canada?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, Miriam, that it's important for anyone any journalist who works in Canada to understand Indigenous peoples. I say that understanding that we all need to have some skills in terms of working with people of different culture. So I'm not Iranian, and I don't know everything about the Iranian culture, but I, from time to time, am asked to do stories about Iranians, and so I need to have a certain level of cultural awareness about dealing with people of different backgrounds and ethnicities. But we can't expect journalists to be experts on all of the world's cultures. I mean, that's just not possible. And we deal with all kinds of people from different backgrounds on a regular basis, and we can't be experts on every different heritage and country in the world. But again, as I said at the beginning, I do think that Canadian journalists or journalists operating in Canada need to have a basic understanding about Indigenous peoples because we are the original people. We are we're part of the distinct uh, uh, culture of this that makes Canada Canada, and we've contributed to the history and the present day of this country, and have uh, uh, distinct rights in this country that any journalist needs to understand if they're going to report fairly. So I try to do two things, and I have had many international students in my reporting in Indigenous communities class that I taught at UBC, who, like you, don't have a lot of awareness, who may have had international stereotypes about North American Indians in and you know so the first thing that I try to do is to show them some of the stereotypes to that exist in the news already about Indigenous people, and how news reporters and journalists have continued to replicate the stereotypes that we've seen in literature and movies and books. And unfortunately, even though we're supposed to be unbiased and objective, we keep repeating those stereotypes. That's the first thing, is to get people to recognize the stereotypes. And then the second thing is to try to introduce to them in as basic a way as possible some of the important parts of Indigenous culture that they need to understand, which is that not all Indigenous people are the same. There are differences and so in the same way, if I go to the Middle East, Iran is not Iraq. And if I was to treat Iranians and Iraqis as if they were the same, then you would laugh at me. And likewise, a Mohawk person is not the same as an Ojibwe person, and they're not the same as a Haida person. And so that's very important for people to understand. And then the next thing is to understand that it's important to ask questions. That you don't need to apologize for your lack of education about Indigenous peoples. That Indigenous peoples have been erased from the history books in Canada on purpose, and so we need to do our homework before we go out and report. But we also need to be clear about what we don't know, and ask questions rather than try to make it up, or be subject to the unconscious biases that we don't even know that we have.
What are the specific stereotypes and types that you mentioned? International people or newcomers think about Aboriginal people?
There's a lot, but I'll give you a couple of examples. I mean, when you go to Europe, as an Indigenous person, people often refer to the Red Indians. And so and this comes from American media, the whole notion of cowboys and Indians, and the fact that there are many people that are surprised that Indigenous people still exist today. They think that Indigenous people are part of the past and no longer, and wear beads and buckskin and feathers, and this whole notion of the Red Indian is very popular in Europe, and I've heard from my Middle Eastern students that's also a stereotype that floats around in the Middle East as well. This kind of historic notion of cowboys and Indians has been that the Americans created intentionally as mythology, is still very prevalent today. And so you hear that a lot from people around the world. Unfortunately, they've been influenced by Pocahontas and Peter Pan and cowboy and Indian movies. A lot of the biases that you see in American movies in particular are the images that people internationally have about Indigenous people in North America.
So why Indigenous people are unfamiliar for newcomers and international people in Canada, especially?
So why are they unfamiliar?
Yes.
Well, in part, it's because journalism has done a poor job in telling Indigenous stories, and so again, I'll keep referring to American media because American media internationally is far more consumed than Canadian media is. American media sets the tone for the way that people internationally view North America, and the American media have done an even worse job than Canadian media in terms of portraying Indigenous peoples. There's very little content at all, and when it is when American journalists do cover Native American issues, it's often full of stereotypes.
Now, what is the media role in shaping the mindsets of newcomers about Indigenous people in Canada?
Well, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has said that the media plays an essential role in terms of educating Canadians, and that includes newcomer Canadians. The fact of the matter is that our education system needs to change, but that journalists not only report news, but they're helping fill in the gaps of that education that's been missing. And so that's a responsibility that journalists have to accept. They have to understand that people don't necessarily have all of the context and background that they need to understand our stories. And so we need to start including that in our stories. So just as a simple example, people may not know what the Indian Act is. They may not know what the treaties are. And so we need to include little reminders about that history and about the colonial history in this country in our news stories, even though that's really hard to do when you've only got an 800-word article or a minute 10 radio piece. We need to offer that context and history so that people understand our stories.
So, you as a journalist, what have you done to shape the mindset of people about original people?
Oh, I mean, I've been filing Indigenous stories for 25 years. So I try to do that in a small way in my own stories. But I also put together the textbook, Decolonizing Journalism, to try to help other journalists to understand how to do a better job.
So, as an Aboriginal journalist, have you faced any issues in newsroom, particularly when you began your job?
Yeah, there's newsrooms in Canada historically have been predominantly white. And so that's not just an issue for Indigenous journalists. It's been an issue for Black journalists and other racialized journalists as well, including Middle Eastern journalists or journalists from a Middle Eastern background. The decision makers in newsrooms have been predominantly white Anglo-Saxon. And that has led to it's not I don't like to say that Canadian journalism has a racism problem, but they do have a problem with ignorance and not understanding the diversity of this country. And so, thankfully, that started to change in the past couple of years, but the change has been a long time coming.
So, what should be taught in journalism schools about Aboriginal people? I mean, just media and journalism schools.
Like I said, I'd go back to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Call to Action 86 says that journalism schools must teach journalism students some basics about Indigenous history, Indigenous culture, Indigenous politics, and I agree with that. I don't know that it should necessarily be a mandatory course. There are challenges about teaching mandatory courses, and there's a lot that we expect of journalism students. But I do think it should absolutely be woven throughout the content of the journalism school.
For the final question, is there anything that you want to add my questions and I miss it?
No, good scoop question. Always good question to ask. And no, I don't have anything else to add.
Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, good luck with the assignment, Mariam.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Okay, take care.
Bye.